As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. I hope that you are all doing pretty amazing today. I'm really glad that you joined us for this episode because it's an episode about some heavy stuff, but I want to break down the heavy stuff and make it user-friendly and make it make sense to everyone out there because it has to do with childhood experiences. And turns out if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to guess that you're probably over the age of 18 or 21 and you have your fair share of childhood experiences. Some of them might be what you would consider adverse, and some of them might have been wonderful childhood experiences. I think that we could all, it's safe to say that we've all had childhood experiences on the continuum. Some good, some bad, some we'd like to forget. So today I have a very special guest. Her name is Staci MacArthur. She is the clinical director of LE Mental Health. She is a licensed clinician and supervisor, and she's also a good friend. We're going to talk about the ACEs, which are actually called adverse childhood experiences. We're going to kind of dispel a lot of the myths surrounding it, and then also talk about trauma and what that has to do or how we can apply this knowledge as wellness coaches, fitness coaches, or anyone out there who is interested in having a healthy mind, healthy body. So Staci, I'm going to bring you in and have you introduce yourself. How you doing?
Hi, Angie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super honored to be here. And yeah, excited to talk about this and how it can be applied to the folks in the fitness community, in the wellness and health community.
All right, wonderful. Well, Staci, I do have to tell everybody how we know each other. So it turns out that Staci and I met because I teach fitness classes and Staci takes my fitness class. And then we had this post-class conversation, which I love to have with people. And we found out that Staci and I are both licensed therapists. And so we've gotten to talk about many different topics related to physical well-being and mental well-being. So Staci, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do? Give us your background.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm currently the clinical director of LE Mental Health in Charlotte, North Carolina. We provide outpatient therapy. We provide therapy for a range of topics and issues. We have an amazing group. I am also currently finishing up my PhD, and I've spent the last, about 3.5 years researching specifically adverse childhood experiences and their impact on our physical health. It's a real passion point for me. In my 20 years of practice, I've worked predominantly with trauma and kind of a spectrum of trauma. So that's really where my professional expertise lies. And I've been focused on, like so many in the mental health field, that kind of neuroscience that we've had come into play in the last about 20 years or so, and the impact it's had on our field and the direction we're going.
100%. And the neuroscience impacts, there, to your point, there has been so much in the media, so much that we're learning about how our childhood experiences affect our physiology, our mental health, our physical well-being. So let's start with that. What are ACEs? What are the adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, so this all came about in 1992. It's been around for a hot minute. And this came about because of a study that was Kaiser Permanente and CDC. And Kaiser Permanente started to say, hey, we're starting to notice that our patients with chronic medical conditions also are conveying to us that they've had some adversity in childhood. And adversity ranges everything from constant criticism to a parent with substance abuse issues, to a parent with mental health issues, to divorce, which is fairly common in our society, unfortunately, And then we go up the ladder to things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. So really, when we use this term childhood adversity, we're really running a gamut of different experiences.
Mm. I think that was really well said. And I like that you kind of broke it down because I do think that even if you're just hanging out on social media, most people have seen something about the ACEs at some point. And I know that you and I have talked to one of the things that you sent me that in that study, over 17,000 participants, around 50% of them had at least one ACE.
Mhm.
And what were there? I think there was 10 questions on the survey, correct?
That's right. So it's a 10-question survey, and each question has two parts to it. So you really could think about it as a 20-question survey, but all of the questions have to do with those different arenas, again, kind of on a continuum. And you're right, Angie, of the 17,000 participants, nearly just shy of 50% of people identified having at least one ACE. And what's significant about that is even at one ACE, the research showed from this study and then studies since then that there is a reasonably significant likelihood, an increased likelihood that you're going to see greater risk for complex medical conditions, complex mental health conditions. So even answering yes to one of those 20 questions is pretty significant and something we should be paying attention to.
Well, and I think that's why you and I, when we had our side conversation after we were sweating in class, what got us into this conversation was the impact, not just emotionally, but the
Yeah.
physical impact, how it affects our
Yes.
entire physiology. And that is kind of what, neuroscience has shown us is this isn't
Yes.
just gee, you had a bad experience. Now you might have depression.
Right.
There's so much more that goes into that, and I know I've
Yes.
sparked the thought with you.
I know. Well, you can see me. I'm like lighting up here, right? I get so pumped up about this. There's been so much really good research about neuroimmunology, how it affects our immune health. So, greater increase of like illness or risk for illness. But yeah, that physical health. So, what we see is increased inflammation held in the body where there have been ACEs. We know that for a fact now. There's an increase in C-reactive proteins, which lead to inflammation. We see an increase in our stress chemicals like cortisol, and our body holds on to that. And oftentimes that can lead to really stubborn, for our health community, paying attention to this. I know many of your listeners probably have had run-ins with the terminology around cortisol and what it does to our body, but it keeps us holding on to fat and it keeps weight on. It's a stress chemical, and our body is going in or staying in fight or flight when we're really experiencing the impact of these ACEs.
Right, and also what comes to my mind, Stacey, and you and I have talked about this, is because of the inflammation and the increased C-reactive protein and all the, increased cortisol, we're talking increased heart disease, all those other types of things. And so
Huge.
while we say these are lifestyle diseases, true, but let's
Mhm.
remember that lifestyle doesn't just include the food you eat and the amount
Yes.
of exercise. Lifestyle
Yes.
means these traumatic experiences that you've held on
Yeah.
to that have increased your cortisol. And I say this because as a person who has kind of a genetically inherited disease, it's often been presented to me like, oh, well, that's a lifestyle decision. Like I
Mhm.
chose this lifestyle, therefore I got this repercussion in my, physical health. But a lot of that also has to do with the high stress levels and the things that we've held on to. And I think I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yes. And I think you're right, Angie. Like putting it into context matters because a lot of times it's not necessarily about lifestyle choices, though that can come into play for sure, because maybe unhealthy coping mechanisms have been developed. But, I think a lot of my clients, and then in the research that I've done, my participants have gotten frustrated when they're told, oh, you just need to eat better. You just need to work out more. And they're feeling like they've done everything they can in that arena. So I think it is an important conversation to put it in the context too.
I think so too. And I think that context means everything. And I do think that it's true that those are lifestyle diseases to a degree. But again,
Yes.
lifestyle has to do with total lifestyle, right? It has to do with all the things that play into how we live our life. And maybe to your point, that makes sense to say that some of the decisions that we make when we're under a lot of stress, when cortisol
Mhm.
is high, absolutely expound that. But it's not to say that you have to get to the core of what the issue really is. Would you
That's right.
agree?
That's right. Yeah, I don't think, you know, we're asking anybody that it's your job to get to the core of what's really going on. But, to be able to put things into context can help us first and foremost be more compassionate, but then also better informed and better educated.
Yeah, and that's my whole goal for this episode is to just kind of dispel some myths around adverse childhood experiences and also to invite in a conversation and to invite in some context about how we're all impacted because if what was it one in what was it 150% of the people had at least one ACE,
That's
and
right.
we know that a lot of us would answer yes to probably at least one of those questions, and so it does warrant that we have a conversation about it. So
It
let's
does.
move on to, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. One thing I was going to say is this study, 50%, is just talking about the things that went on in the home during childhood. So birth to 18. What it doesn't even account for is what happened after that. Has anything gone on after that that might fall? We'll talk a little bit about that continuum of trauma, but this is specifically looking at research related to what happened in the home. And there's a lot more research, again, with neurophysiology, neuroimmunology around the body's reaction to trauma beyond this. So that 50% number might be a little underreported when we're looking at trauma or adversity as a whole.
Well, of course, because think about when you go away to college, think about, I mean, we could go on and on about all the things that happen to women, to men, to our population
Yes.
as a whole as we grow
Yeah.
up and have different experiences. So let's talk about trauma because that is such, I mean, uh, trauma is everywhere. Everybody wants to talk about trauma, and everyone, and I don't mean to generalize, but if
Yes.
you are on social media, there's a
Yes.
lot of talk of trauma and trauma this, trauma that. But let's really kind of
Mhm.
talk about the trauma umbrella and and give
Yes.
some really good ground.
Okay. I love that you use the word umbrella. I use that word umbrella because I think now when we talk about trauma as a society, it really is this umbrella. And we know when we hear trauma, combat veterans, that's almost immediately what comes to mind. A lot of my clients, a lot of my research participants and the research I've done have discounted their experience because it's not, say, combat veteran, or it's not, say, a rape or something like that, or a really severe car accident. So we know that's trauma. We can look at that and we can all agree, yep, that fits. That's trauma. Um, what gets discounted really often is we might call that, and there's some debate about the verbiage around this still, like in the therapist community even. So at some point, and even now, some people would refer to those things as big T trauma. We know it's trauma. We know it's impactful. It's big T trauma. And then we have what we might call little T trauma. And we want to be careful about using that word. And that's why it's kind of become a little less popular. But really, what we're referring to is the stuff that builds up that maybe we would discount at first glance. So, I think a good example is Angie, and I know I shared this with you. Like, let's say a kid's getting bullied at school, and let's say it happens, once or twice over the course of this kiddo's academic career. He or she's going to be fine. They're going to be fine. They'll figure it out, right? Once or twice, we're good. But when we're talking little t, that compounding, let's say the same kiddo is going to school and getting bullied every single day to the point that they're developing anxiety when they walk into that building. They're nervous, they're anxious, they're scared every day. And then let's say that same kid goes home and maybe one of their parents has a mental health condition untreated or a substance abuse disorder. And so now they're going home and maybe the home is very unsettled and they don't know what to expect. perhaps there's criticism, perhaps home life is like a moving target. I think you and I have heard that often in our field. Oh, it was a moving target. I would be told to do this and then that wasn't right. So if that's that child's experience and there's no stability or consistency in either of those places, that kiddo's on. Their antennas are up constantly in every environment. And now what happens is that neurological impact, right? We start to, our amygdala, that's our fight, flight, freeze center, that is engaged in every environment this kiddo goes in. So when nowhere is truly safe, right, we're going to develop these neural pathways to kind of stay on guard, to be prepared. And I know I mentioned this to you. It's kind of like, and I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's kind of like I would compare it to when I take your class, when we increase our metabolic state, when we have a really great workout, and it stays increased. Our metabolic state continues to be impacted once we leave the workout, not just while we're there. It's the same thing with this neurological impact.
And I thought that was really well said, Staci. Seriously, that was a great way of describing it. Because what happens is, you say moving target. I always say, unpredictability, where you never know where you stand with a
Yeah.
person. So a kid comes home and, like you said, they're bullied consistently, persistently. Then they come home, it's not really an emotionally or a psychologically safe environment at home. And so there's no real safety net. It's not like when you jump off the building, you land on the net, right? There's you jump off the building, you don't know if there's going to be a net there to catch you. And the word that you and I talk about, and it's used
To
a
be
lot
in
in,
that,
what's that?
for sure.
You cut out a second. Sorry
Oh,
about
I
that,
said for
Staci.
sure. Just rolling. Yes.
Yes. And, when you think about that, what that does when somebody is always staying in fight or flight, it leads to just a lot of dysregulation. So when they grow up in this unpredictable environment,
Yes.
they kind of get this dysregulated way of dealing with situations and people and environments. And so when they're in an uncomfortable situation, maybe contextually, the way they respond to that situation seems, whoa, that's so way over the top for what just happened. But in this
That's
person's
right.
mind, nothing's over the top. They're just in a
Nothing's over the
dysregulated
top.
state.
Yeah. And we talk about, like, with that continuum includes everything from adversity, childhood adversity, to little T traumas to big T traumas. And we don't want to discount as professionals the impact of those adversities, because to your point, Angie, like, the adversities can also create dysregulation. So we can look and say, oh, divorce, everybody goes through that. But the reality is, again, back to that context, what happened with that divorce in that home? So, that range from adversity to big T trauma and everything in between can create that dysregulated state. It comes as no surprise that big T trauma does, but it's the little T stuff or adversity that might show up in some funky ways and surprise even those people who have dealt with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I really wanted to bring that up because I think that sometimes people who are what I call high responders,
Mhm.
they're very
Good word.
dysregulated. And so even the smallest thing can get them jacked up, if you will. And again, contextually, their responses might be different. So, Staci, before we move on, I want to reintroduce you. So, my name is Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. My guest is Staci MacArthur. She is a PhD candidate and she studies trauma. That's what her dissertation is on. And so much of her research is developed around trauma and especially the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, which is what we're talking about today because we want to dispel all the myths around trauma. We want to talk about adverse childhood experiences. And then we want to talk about why does that matter in the fitness and health oriented community? And I think it matters big time. And that's why I brought Staci on so that she could kind of help guide us in this space and say, okay, we're not going to be able to deal with trauma with our clients. That's not our space or place. But how can we have a more compassionate lens for their experiences? So, Staci,
Mhm.
that's my kind of lead in to say, okay, so how does this or why does this matter to the fitness and health community?
Yeah, this is huge. And I'm so grateful anytime I get to have these conversations. So specifically, my research is on trauma-informed primary care. And I think trauma informed in almost any setting. Imagine if that was happening in an academic setting and we could be more responsive. And even when it comes to any health arena, I think it really matters that we have some foundation of trauma informed. If you're dealing with people's bodies, their minds, their physical and emotional, you have a role in this. And Angie, to your point, like it's not about, okay, go heal them, right? That's not your job, that's there. So we know why this matters to the fitness community. We know from all this research, from 30 plus years of research, that no matter where a person falls on that continuum, if they fall on that continuum, that they're going to have some neurological changes in their brain. And that can make processing things like touch, like sounds, smells. Just how powerful smells are for us when we think about our childhood and smells we link. Words, huge, right? And then emotions, they all become a little more complicated for this group. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on that I thought could be helpful is just kind of 4 tips. What do we do about this? What do we pay attention to? And what do we do about it? If you are working with other humans and you're dealing with the body and you're dealing with emotions and you're dealing with this concept of wellness.
Yeah, I think that's good because, I've done many different segments on social media and I've done some work for the APA and the NASM on talking about like why words
Mhm.
matter. And,
Mhm.
touch is a big thing to your point. Emotions are more complicated. And so, yes, I can turn on a song on the radio and it can transport me back 20 years. Well,
Oh my
imagine if
gosh.
that song on the radio brought up really harsh memories or really difficult circumstances. The same thing to your point of sounds and smells. So let's dig into the
Yeah.
4 tips for being a trauma informed
Yeah.
professional. And we say trauma informed. We're not saying you're going to help manage the trauma. We're not saying that you're going to deal with the trauma. We're just saying, what does it mean to be trauma
Right.
informed as a professional so that you can help maybe
Mhm.
understand, hey, this sounds like why my client might do this when I go to touch them. And that's why it's important to
Yeah.
ask if you can touch. But let's go into that. What's your first tip that you would say
Yeah.
to be trauma informed?
So my first tip, and Angie, I just kind of want to reiterate again, when you were talking about that word trauma informed, we're talking about that continuum. So again, using that word as an umbrella, continuum. But my first tip is just be informed, be aware, right? Be aware that this is a thing. This is the direction that certainly the mental health community is going in. Some of the physical health community is going in, and then the wellness community. So simply being more aware of the prevalence, like 50%, a huge number. So being aware of the prevalence and the impact of childhood adversity or trauma might just make you a little more cognizant of how you engage with your clients. And certainly, I think you mentioned this, it might help you as a professional better understand some of the behaviors that your clients have when you're like, what, what was that about?
Mhm.
Right? Having some trauma informed information might help you go, oh, okay, maybe that is a possibility for this client. So that's easy. First tip, be informed, be aware. That's it.
Well, and I think along with that tip, I would say it increases compassion because even if there's somebody in your life who is very dysregulated, who is a high responder, who almost makes you crazy because you never know how they're going to show up and they're so super unpredictable, maybe stepping back and having a compassionate lens and saying, I don't know their story. And because I don't know their story, I'm going to look at them with more compassion and less judgment, even if I don't understand it. And even if it makes me not want to be around it, at least I can do that through a lens of compassion versus judgment.
I think that's huge. I mean, compassion is half the battle because we're all busy. We all put our best effort into what we're doing. And when we feel like it's maybe not being met how we expected it to be met, we can feel frustration. We can feel discouraged. So I think you're right, Angie. Just having that compassion is a big part of this component here.
Right. We don't know other people's stories. So,
We
what's
don't.
another tip? Just be informed. I think first and foremost, they're tuning into
Yeah.
you to get informed. But what's another one?
Yeah. So we mentioned touch. This is a big, big, big one. This is probably the biggest one I hear my clients and the research participants I've talked to. This is one of the biggest ones they discuss. So for our fitness community, for our health community, we're closely engaged with clients. There is touch, there is body movement. So one of the things that's become more popular is trauma-informed massage, and masseuses getting trained on trauma-informed approaches. So when we talk about like the fitness community, for example, just even correcting a person's form, even if that touch seems like super innocuous, it can really be activating. It can really generate a strong response for trauma survivors. There are things we can do about that too. So should we get into that a little bit?
Yeah, you mean things like kind of, giving them a verbal warning. Like, is it okay if I touch you here?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I would recommend is at the outset of working with a client, gather information. Just ask them, is there any potential that if I were to touch you and correct your form, it could be uncomfortable or activating for you? So before you do anything, make a note of it, ask them, engage them. That's going to be an indicator that you're trauma informed right out of the gate to them. And it's respectful and it's kind. It treats them with dignity. And then, like you said, ask them if they said, yeah, it's okay for you to touch me. Go ahead and say, hey, I'd like to correct your form. Is it okay if I ... And so just ask them before you do anything with touch, if it's okay to do that. Give them that verbal and put control in their hands. That's really important for our trauma and our ACE survivors.
I love that idea of putting control in their hands, because if you ask me, "Hey, Angie, can I touch your back?" Okay. "Hey, Angie, can I touch your neck?" I know this is a weird one, but I don't love to be touched on my neck. Has nothing to do with trauma, but for me, I don't love to be touched there. So for me, I like it if you say, "Can I touch you here?" And I want to know where you're going to touch me, where you're going to correct me. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. Absolutely.
That's right. Absolutely. So, and then, even at that very first conversation, if they say, yeah, it's okay for you to touch me when you're correcting my form, we can do a good, thorough follow-up. Is there anywhere you'd like me to avoid? Right. So, I think outside of the obvious areas, you mentioned back, you mentioned neck, like, yeah, lower back, hips can be a big one. That pelvic floor, one of the things that the research shows us is that a lot of sexual assault survivors will hold trauma in that pelvic floor arena. So hips, legs, lower back, chest, neck, throat are all areas that might be just especially sensitive.
And I've always heard of the psoas as the seat of emotions. And so,
Yes.
absolutely, especially
Yeah.
for women. So let's talk about, because I know you want to talk about alexithymia, and I want to really make sure that I know that's your third tip, and I really want to make sure, because I think that this is a powerful one when we're working with human beings. So tell the listeners about alexithymia, what this
Yeah.
means for them.
So big bulky word, alexithymia. Alexithymia, people who have endured especially big T traumas, especially in the form of abuse, can often develop a coping mechanism of just completely shutting down their feelings. They'll shut down both emotionally and physically. This is a huge coping mechanism when people have been in abusive dynamics. And so what that means, if we're shutting down as a kiddo, or a teenager, when we should be learning about our bodies and our feelings, people with alexithymia, this word specifically means that a person can't recognize their emotions, even happiness, which is so weird to say. I've had clients say, I don't even know if I'm happy. So we work on that in therapy sessions sometimes, like defining that and what does it look like and mean. And but alexithymia is that inability to recognize, and then important for our wellness community, convey emotions and what's happening in their body. So alexithymia can encompass all of that and make it really complicated if you're working with a client on their body and they can't describe to you, what's going on with their body, that makes it really complex for you as a fitness professional. It leaves you in a position where asking a client to describe what they're feeling physically may not actually be all that productive, because they may not know, they may, and I know this is a deficit for, for the folks in the fitness community working with other people in their bodies. They may make up an answer to like save face. So yeah, I think alexithymia is a big deal, and not something that's often talked about. I don't think it makes it into like the books that we're reading about wellness and healthcare and the impact it could actually really have.
Mm. And I think to your point, it's really impactful, because sometimes I do find that sometimes clients will just give you an answer because it's almost like they want to move on, or they don't want to. It almost like invites shame. They're asking me how I feel, and I can't tell them how I feel, but apparently I'm supposed to know, so I'm going to give you an answer. And so I think that it's a huge one for us here in the fitness space. And even for those who are listening, and if you don't train clients or work with clients, if you're just a person who wants to have a healthier mind and body, for us to give you permission and say it makes sense to us if you can't fully describe what you're feeling in your body. And so let's talk about, Staci, I know you have some quality tips on how to guide people if in fact they're asking their client, how do you feel? And they can't tell you. Can you give us like a brief version of what they could ask to get to the core of it?
That's right. Yeah. So one of the first things that I might suggest is use a body chart. It sounds so silly. I mean, you can draw a little person on a sheet of paper. It doesn't have to be fancy, right? Like, save yourself from money. You don't have to save yourself the money. You don't have to go on Amazon. You can take a little piece of paper, draw a body chart, and guide them in the language. So like when you go to the doctor's office and you see that little body chart, or go to the chiropractor and they're like, where do things hurt? So you can guide them in the language, but using the body chart actually takes some of the focus off of their own body. And a lot of our trauma folks, especially if it's big T, especially if it's combat, sexual assault, physical abuse, are wildly uncomfortable with their own bodies. That can become a factor for them. So not all of them, I want to make that clear, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination. But so using a body chart takes the focus off of their own body, puts it onto that image, and you can start to say things like, do you notice any tension? Do you notice a twinge? Do you notice where you feel more muscle relaxation? Do you notice after a workout, does a part of your body, does your arm, your bicep, your quad feel different than some of the other parts of your body? Tell me more about that. So using a body chart can be really helpful, just from the standpoint of it takes attention of the things that I would go to. The other thing, Angie, I know I mentioned this to you, is helping your client understand the difference between typical soreness and strain. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but many times, if there's strain that could be concerning, you mentioned this before, your client may not say anything about it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll talk about that a little more in the next tip. But when it comes to helping them understand what their body's experiencing, I love using scales with my clients.
Yeah.
They probably get so sick of me. I use scales all the time. We scale everything in my office. But it helps them. It's very subjective. So if we use a 1 to 10 scale, where maybe 1 is feeling loose, there's no muscle tension. The very first time they come into you and they don't have any medical issues and they're feeling loose, there's no tension, you can help them do some movement and notice that. I'm shaking my shoulders right now for those who are tuning in and not watching. But like even just that, you notice your shoulders are loose, your neck when you do that. You always do that in a warm up or on your cool downs. Shake your head yes, shake your head no, right? We can notice that there's some looseness in our movement. We can help them identify that. There you go. That's your 1. Cool. 1, looseness, no muscle tension. Let's say 3 to 5. Maybe that's good soreness, the soreness we like after a workout with good recovery time. And so maybe we're starting to recognize, oh, wait, you're not a 1 anymore. Well, where do you feel things? Let's consult the chart if you can't point it out on your own body. Maybe 6 to 7 is good soreness. Maybe that's a longer recovery time. Oh, wait, you felt that soreness for 3 days instead of 2? Okay, I'm going to make a note of that. And then if we go up to 8 to 10, that they're like, oh, this is beyond those good sorenesses. So
Mhm.
scaling things, it's subjective. When you have your first session, your first meeting with a client, and you say, tell me where you think your body is. Let's do a little bit of this movement. And what are you feeling? What do you think? Are you loose? Are you not loose? Then if you know they're starting at a 3, it gives you just some data and some information, and your client some information. And guess
Mhm.
what? You just happen to get them more in tune with their own body, which is kind of cool.
Well, and isn't that I think that's amazing the way you described it, because isn't that the goal? So when we
Mhm.
scale things, we give them a working mechanism to make sense of how they
Exactly.
feel. And we take kind of some pressure off them, because to your point, just this, even if you draw this just little stick figure body, we take the pressure. It's not your body, it's a body. And so they can identify with this external body, but give you information that you can then use to work with them in a more personalized way. So I think that was a
Yeah,
really, really great way of describing that. So,
it really
um,
does. It really lets them tune in a different way.
yeah. And the information is powerful. And I like the scaling, because there's a huge, when you give them the scale, then they get more body informed. Just like we're getting more trauma
Mhm.
informed, they're getting
Yes.
body informed. They're learning to tune into their body and their mind. And they're learning that it's powerful and it informs them, because they don't even know that their body gives them information.
Yes,
Right.
that's huge. I love that. I love that you said that because it does. It helps them become much more body informed. And it gives
Yeah.
them language to use, right? It gives them language to use with maybe their medical provider, with maybe their chiropractor, with maybe other people in their world, even their significant other, to go home and say, hey, you know, hon, I'm like a 9 today. I don't feel great
Right.
versus I don't know what's going on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, super helpful.
Well, and imagine if we walk it back a minute. Imagine if people were able to use this language and say, "I'm a 9 today." And then the
Mhm.
people around them understand and they go, "Oh, okay, she's not just wildly unpredictable. She's just now able to make sense of what's going on up here, what's going on in her
Yeah,
body." And so because of this information, she can better describe where she's at, so that she doesn't seem so dysregulated and unpredictable all the time.
that's right. They can
So
now communicate. Mhm.
right. So, Stacey, let's move on to the last tip, because this
Yeah.
happens to be, I don't know, everything you've said is kind of my favorite, but this one, I really want to make sure we get to this before we close the show, because
Yeah.
this is, oh my gosh, this is such a big animal. And I have to
Mhm.
admit, there's such a big component of this that I can relate to. And I think that you've said maybe you can relate to it. And so do want to put it out there that if we say this and you're like, oh gosh, I must have trauma, just it's that fear of disappointment, that hypersensitivity to criticism and that
Yeah.
perfectionism.
Yeah.
Ooh, this is such a big one. But let's kind of just a nutshell version of, how this might impact somebody who is, in fact, a person who's had trauma.
Yeah, so you're right. Like there are just personality types that are the perfectionists of the world and they've not had trauma or adverse experiences. So I want to just recognize that. But when it comes to trauma and even childhood adversity, there can be a lot of shame around that. So most of my clients who've experienced trauma or childhood adversity that has that kind of ongoing effect or can be damaging, they will tell you there is shame and they will go into a shame spiral. Brene Brown calls it the shame spiral, and it's so true. And so what happens is oftentimes these kids have to show up, and if I can be this, maybe this won't happen. I'm trying to meet the target. I just want to meet the target, right? Or maybe I'm getting criticized a lot, not good enough messages. So there can be a real fear of disappointment. There can be hypersensitivity to criticism, and a lot of perfectionism with this group, which I think is maybe unexpected for a lot of people. So this comes from the shame, and then they go into protective mode really quickly. These are people whose antennas are up and they are almost looking for a reason to go into protective mode, whether it's conscious or subconscious. That is a reflection of, I mentioned the amygdala before. This is the neurology part. the amygdala gets hyperactive, and that's our fight, flight, freeze center. So that part of our brain, when we experience that continuum adversity to trauma, gets hyperactive. So now I'm really sensitive to what you would call feedback as a trainer, as a healthcare professional, as a wellness professional. They might be sensitive to and identify it. Their perception might be criticism. And then it's really easy when I perceive criticism to go right into a shame spiral. That can be shame about my body, about my emotions, about, inability to communicate effectively. When we walk away going, oh gosh, they probably think I'm an idiot, right? Inability, fears and shame about just messing up. Maybe we got criticism about, who we were as a person, or the things we did, or not getting good enough grades, or so that fear around messing up. So that's where I would go with this, is that a lot of folks in the wellness community might want to be cognizant, and this isn't on you to fix, but it's something you can work with. That feedback might be misconstrued as criticism in this community and might cause one of your clients to just shut down.
Yeah. And I think that's powerful, because I think it also, some of the clients that I've had, it isn't even so much that it was criticism surrounding not being good enough. It could be like, I've had many clients describe that they were the perfect one in their family. It was up to me to be perfect, so
Oh,
that
yeah.
my brothers and sisters could mess up. So I had to be perfect. But then there gets to
Yeah.
be this message that perfect is never perfect enough, because what then happens is their perfect didn't fix the situation. And so they spend their whole lives trying to be perfect enough, like it's going to fix everything and everyone around them. And then it's real easy to go into a shame spiral if, in fact, their perfect job did not just up level everybody and put everybody in this perfect state. And so there's just a kind of a globalization with, if I do this, then all of this is going to be okay. And so I think that one of the things that is important in that situation is just normalize it and say it's normal that I get feedback, and it's normal that we're always progressing, and it's normal that we're always trying to do a little bit better than what we did yesterday. Not from a place of you're not doing good enough, but from a place of I know you can do even more when you're ready. And if you're not,
Mhm.
where you're at is perfect. What do you think of that kind of language?
Love that. I love that. And I talk with my clients in my sessions about, I may gently nudge you. That's my job, is to gently nudge you in a direction. And if that day is not the day for gentle nudging, you know what? Yeah, I need you to tell me, like, Staci, nope, not today. Like, not today, sister. So I do. I love, like, normalizing that the work that they're doing is not going to be that constant straight line upward trajectory, that you may have a week where your body you're exhausted. Your body's not cooperating. I love to run. I can't tell you the number of times I've had bad runs where I'm like, oh God, I'm never going to be able to run a good run again. And so not getting into that like destructive type of catastrophic thinking. So normalizing for them that the trajectory often has little dips in it as you're making that kind of steady increase. You might have a week or a day or a month where you're feeling like you're set back. So normalizing that, I love that you use the word normalize. I think that's absolutely important here. Give them examples of when other clients have had setbacks, like really let them know they're not the only ones. And then let them know that you expect it. Because one of the things with our trauma survivors is they're concerned about disappointing other people. They're not being good enough in other people's eyes. So if you show up and you at the outset say to them, setbacks are going to happen. I expect it to, and it's going to be okay when it does. And you should expect it to also, so that you're okay when it happens. And I piggyback on that, if that's okay. I know we're running short on time here, but developing a plan at the outset of your work with them to deal with the setbacks. So, hey friend, like, what are you going to do when you do, eat that box of whatever cookies? What are you going to do? What's our plan? What's our game plan when you intend to work out, but you don't work out that day? Like, what's our game plan when those things happen? If it doesn't surprise you, it's going to be less surprising to them. Build it in to the whole model that you're working with. And then one of the things that can be helpful is if they are in a setback, give them one or two. We don't want to give them a whole list of options of things to do, because that kind of traumatized brain can clog up really easily. So what you might want to do if they're in a setback is to give them one or two things and say, I want you to go do this. I want you to just go for a 15-minute walk. I see that you're in a setback. I know you're feeling it. Go walk for 15 minutes. Just do that and see what it feels like. So giving them some little steps that can help, their directives that can help just kind of jar them out of this space. And the last thing I would say is, this kind of surprised me, but in doing the research with my trauma clients, one of the things that they said has been most impactful for them when they're seeking out care with a physician is reassurance. And I for whatever reason, I don't know, Angie, I didn't expect that to come up as much as it has. But I think that can carry over into this setting too, that you being there to reassure your client, that you see them doing good work, that they're in the right space, that they're moving in the right direction, even in the face of a setback. That reassurance can go a long, long, long way with tempering that deregulation. Oh, wait, this is normal? Oh, it's not just me. I don't know how many times you've heard that in your practice. I sure have. Oh, it's not just me. This is normal. Oh, it's okay that happened. Okay, you're going to give me something to help me get over this hump. Now I can let my body settle in this space a little more, which is pretty cool.
Well, and I think that reassurance, I think normalizing, and I think to your point, the reassurance, because I think that sometimes maybe people get frustrated with people and say, well, she needs too much reassurance. She needs too many pats on the back, or he needs too much of this. But keep in mind that if a person needs more reassurance than another person, I always say it's like listening. Does it cost you anything? Does it take away from you to give someone extra reassurance? Sure, you might think, well, gosh, they need more reassurance than any of my other clients, or they need me to normalize things more than anyone else. And that might be true. And guess what? If you can do your job, it's free. It's just like listening. And I think that's so important. And Staci, before we close the show, I want to say a few things that I think are most important that I got out of this segment and kind of give everybody a sum up. And that is that when adverse childhood experiences, when the ACEs study came out, we were dealing with kids, up to the age of 18. But remember that trauma and adversity can happen throughout the lifespan. Rape, big car accidents, somebody breaking into your home, fires in your home. All of these things can cause trauma. And so I think what I want to say too is we don't want to do this in the sense of, oh, well, if you have adverse childhood experiences, then we're back to blame your parents. Your parents probably had adverse childhood experiences, and their parents probably had adverse childhood experiences. So what I would like to say from where I stand is, what if we all just look in the mirror and say, yes, I may have had these adverse childhood experiences, and yes, it's up to me then to figure out what I can do to lessen the pain and make peace with what happens so that I can move forward in a powerful way. And I hope that that's what we got out of this as health coaches and wellness coaches. And also, this is our idea, and this is what we know about trauma. And this is how you can have a more compassionate lens in working with your clients. Staci, is there anything that I didn't say or something you want to say to kind of close things up?
No, I think I really enjoyed this conversation. I have such a heart for this space, and I think we covered so many topics. I would invite, if people reach out to you, I'd invite additional conversation. I'm always happy to answer questions. So getting folks in touch with me is just fine. And then if you're bouncing around on Ellie Charlotte's website, you'll find me there. So you can get in touch that way. But yeah, I just think it's an important conversation. And I'd go back to that tip number one is how I would close this out. And just say, by listening to this podcast, by looking at a little bit of research, by Googling, a simple Google can get you a long way when it comes to trauma-informed information. Cleveland Clinic, National Institute on Mental Health, a lot of folks have really great information out there, Kaiser Permanente. So awareness I'd just go back to that and keep it simple and come full circle there.
Yeah. Awareness, compassion, and
Mhm.
reassurance. Our study
Mhm.
could be called ACR,
Yeah,
awareness, compassion, and reassurance.
compassion.
What do you think?
I love it.
So,
I love it.
yeah. So,
Beautiful.
Stacey, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to all of
Thank
our
you.
Strong Mind, Strong Body listeners. We appreciate you joining us today to kind of deep dive into a topic that could be very heavy and weighty. And yet, look how powerful it is in dealing with and managing people, not just the people that you work with, but the people that you love. And how about yourself? So, it was good to see all of you. And we look forward to seeing you next week.